Okay, today, start chapter 7, conflict resolution, section 1, the nature of conflict. We're basically going to look at what most teenagers probably going to deal with conflict, some of the very natures of what conflict is. So just like the question I just posed there, what is conflict? Conflict, simply by definition, is a disagreement between people with opposing viewpoints, ideas, and goals. Okay? Conflict is a part of everyday life. We're all going to deal with it day in, day out. Most of you realize us teachers are typically dealing with this on a constant basis, whether the conflict be about getting schoolwork done, appropriate behavior, or just being nice to one another. So where do some of our common conflicts come from? All right. I'll dare to say this is probably the biggest form of conflict that people deal with on a day-in-day-out basis. It's basically just on opinions. I've always told students one simple thing. If you want to create an argument or create a conflict, talk about one of these two things. Politics and religion, or religious things. Most of us would agree that most arguments will form around these two things. I guarantee that even if you and someone else have similar points of view on both of them, you will eventually conflict over something that you're talking about. This is the very reason why we have a war, is because conflict over these two things. It's something that's it's very unavoidable, but it is definitely a factor. And when you have to talk about conflict, is just that opinions are going to just be that. They're opinions. My number one rule I tell a lot of people is, if you don't want to start an argument, don't talk about these two things. Relationships are obviously points of conflict. Most of us have seen people in a relationship argue or disagree, and that's normal. That's going to happen. Space. Why something like what do you mean by space? Space could be about anything. Space could just be how you use your own space in your room. Somebody may not like how your parents may not like how your room's set up, or how disorganized it is. It can be that. It can be even just how person buys an empty lot in a community, builds something there, and the people that don't like how that lot was built there, or however that building was built there. Things like that can also cause conflict. And then this last thing I talked about comes into this part is just property. But property conflicts can also arise over where the property lines are, who's got right to a property. I think of property also thinking of just like if someone passes away and they leave a will, and there's oftentimes an argument about what should or shouldn't be left to this person or that person. Okay, we have some different types of conflicts we need to talk about as well. The first type of kinds of conflict we're talking about is just basically the size of a conflict. All right. Like I said, we've talked about this. We've touched on this a little bit. By size, we mean that it can be nothing more than simple words. You have just words of disagreement with someone in the hallway. No one even raises their voice. You look at each other. One person says one thing, another person says another thing. You walk your own separate ways. That's normal. But then it can escalate to the point, like it says there, you can get gangs that are going to argue in inner cities or even other areas. War between countries, or even gang wars. These conflicts are often very dangerous. There will probably be life loss in these situations. Now, we also have the internal versus external conflict. Your internal conflict is nothing more than a conflict with yourself. Internal conflict, I hear a lot of people kind of vocalize. I have a wife and daughter, and it's like, well, how do these clothes look? It's kind of like, I don't know what to say. I mean, for me, it's more of an external conflict. For them, it's an internal conflict. Do the clothes look right? Do they match? So on and so forth. Like I already mentioned, is external conflict and interpersonal, two or more people. Go back to that same thing. My external conflict is do I answer that question? My internal conflict is do I answer the question nicely, or do I be completely honest? And even that I've ever had been asked that question, how do these clothes look on me? Take a word of advice, choose your words very carefully. Interpersonal conflict, this is kind of like I said, this could be just simply the exchange of words. It can go much deeper than that. It can be that point that people literally cannot be in the same room together. This has happened. I have seen this happen. And it can often, and it's funny how I always say it's never one person versus one person. It's always 1 versus 2, or 2 versus 3, or 2 versus 8. And it's, I don't know, for some reason everyone wants, when there's conflict, they want the more people supporting them than they worry about themselves. Alright, getting conflicts that most of you are very well familiar with are conflicts within our homes. They often occur around people you spend a lot of time with. Okay, yes, conflict is normal. No offense, your closest friends are some of the people you argue the most with. Flip side is, obviously, when you're at home, you're going to argue with a lot of people. Those of you that have siblings know exactly what I mean. Most of the time, though, your conflict's going to be with your parents and guardians. And they're often going to have to do with limits, responsibilities, and expectation. Limits may be you have a 10 o'clock curfew. You think it should be 11. Responsibilities are they're getting after you to do your chores and you just don't feel like doing them. Expectations are is that they expect you to be an A-B student, and why do you have a D in the class? These are all things that are very reasonable for parents to expect of their kids. The thing you got to remember within this, and you'll find out someday when you're a parent too, is parents are ultimately trying to protect and keep you healthy, alright? It's no different than us as teachers. We're trying to protect you and keep you healthy. We're trying to push you and get you going in the right direction. One thing you've got to refer to in your mind is that, no offense, some of you may think you have the power, but in the end your parents have the power and they decide what's best for you, alright? Unless a court document states otherwise, your parents are responsible for you. Now, like I mentioned before, siblings. Siblings to me can be kind of like gang warfare, except everyone has their own gang, which means each individual within the house, a sibling in the household, is their own gang, and it's gang warfare. And oftentimes it can be about anything and everything under the sun. It can have to do with using one sibling's item or video game or whatever it may be. I think of sisters that borrow clothes, guys using one person's football without permission, whatever it may be. Like I say, it can be anything and everything under the sun. It could be that you use the wrong tone of voice with your sibling. I had 3 siblings growing up. I know all too well about this. I can honestly tell you there was fist fights amongst all 3 of us. Or I should say 4 of us. And it didn't matter. And sometimes they were probably over some really silly things. And this is the one thing we probably failed miserably at, me and my siblings, is that we didn't always use a calm head. Sometimes we resorted to fists, to arguments, to yelling and hollering and swearing at each other. I'm not encouraging it, I'm just saying I know what happens. But use a calm head, because in the end, it really isn't worth the argument or fighting which you want to do. A lot of times if someone starts getting wound up, the best thing you can do is probably walk away. Now, looking at the conflicts outside of your home. These, most of the time, we're going to refer around these 3 things: school, friends, and peer, which actually really centralized around school. And it's often between you and your friends. Yeah, you're going to have some arguments with people that maybe quote-unquote aren't your friends, and that's normal, but the majority of what you disagree upon or you absolutely will not give ground on, or things that you're going to argue with your friends about. And oftentimes these things are going to have to do with an incident that happens in the hallway. It can be something minor or something major. I'll dare to say about 75% of the time it's fairly minor. It has to do with power and who's in control. You know, we talked about cliques and groups and stuff like that. There's always a leader, there's always a follower, and there's always some in between. And eventually, somewhere along the line, so there's a power struggle and things like that, and that often creates conflict. And the last thing it says there is simply that, is people are looking for attention. If one person's going to start conflict because they want to create attention for themselves. I think a lot of students do this with teachers to try creating attention for themselves. Now, the one thing that conflict often does lead to is what we're going to call bullying, alright? Most of us know what bullying is. Most of you know my personal thoughts on bullying. Bullying is probably the most overused term right now within the school systems. But we are going to give it a definition because it is appropriate. Bullying is someone who picks on individuals who are smaller and weaker than them. This part I don't disagree with. By definition, that is a bully. But the thing that I think really needs to be added to that is that they assert power on an individual. They make a person do things they wouldn't normally do. That's the true definition of bullying. This is where it gets kind of dangerous really fast. If you make people not want to go out, you make people not want to do things, now you're asserting a power on them. And that they actually want to hide away from the world. Now you're doing something that you shouldn't be doing. Teasing. Now, the book says teasing of any kind is bullying. I disagree with this. Teasing to me is a joke or a comment. If it's a joke or comment, and most of you know I do this all the time, does that make me a bully? No. Is it meant in humor and fun? Then yeah, it's fine. If it becomes constant badgering and berating, that's bullying. For those of you who don't know what berating means, it means that you're constantly putting someone down, making fun of them for something. And it's constant. Now we're getting to that line where now you're going to create problems for the people. I did read something interesting online the other day. They figured supposedly in California, and also take it with a grain of salt since it's from California, that the school system there loses approximately, I want to say, $1 billion of funding a year because, a lot of schools get paid on attendance of students. They figure because of bullying there alone that they lose close to $1 billion to their public school system. Since kids, claim to be bullied, stay home, pretend to be sick so they don't have to deal with the bullies. They figure it costs approximately $1 billion to the public school system every year in California. And that's quite a significant amount of money if you actually stop and think about it. Alright. Within teasing, we also have to worry about labeling and name calling. Like I said, some things you gotta take with a grain of salt. Teenagers are gonna be teenagers to a degree. Like our speaker said here about a month ago or whatever it was, at some point you gotta have thick skin and just let it roll off you. If it gets to the point where it's not rolling off and it's because it's like it goes back to the constant badgering and berating, then we have an issue. If it's a one-time comment, just let it go, move on. Don't give the person the time of day, alright? We get into this too, and this is an important thing, and this is something I think within our community we do have a problem with. There's the word prejudice. Prejudice is a negative and unjustly formed opinion usually formed against the people of different racial, religious, and cultural groups. The only thing I'm going to say about this is basically that since a lot of people here have been here their whole lives, they only know how this place is, they kind of fall for the trap of this is how the world is ran best. And I'm not saying to a degree they're right, but to another degree, they got to understand that there's a whole different perspective by different people in the world, and not one point of view is ever going to be 100% correct. And this is where our prejudices often come from, is because we believe that basically we're superior in one way, shape, or form. Alright, that's today's lesson. Make sure you go back and read it in your book, and have a nice day.